Commander Zeftai had seen 37 different species wage war across the galaxy. He had witnessed the methodical precision of the Kree-Thak Empire, survived the berserker fury of the Valdaran hordes, and commanded fleets against the technological supremacy of the Nexari Collective. In his 4 centuries of military service, he thought he had seen every form of violence the universe could produce. He was wrong. The humans changed everything. They didn't just fight wars. They transformed the very concept of what warfare could be. When Zeftai first encountered them during the Outer Rim conflicts, he made the same mistake every alien commander before him had made. He underestimated them. Now, as he sits in the dim light of a recording chamber on the neutral station of Haven's Rest, his 3 eyes carry the weight of terrible knowledge. The scars across his chin and his face tell stories of battles that should have been impossible to survive. His words, captured for the Galactic Military Archives, will serve as both warning and testament to a truth that has shaken the very foundations of interstellar warfare. The humans were never the weakest species to enter the galactic stage. They were the most dangerous. And Zeftai learned this lesson in the bloodiest way possible. Let me tell you about the day I realized we weren't fighting soldiers. We were fighting something far more terrifying. We were fighting humans who had nothing left to lose. The recording device hummed softly as Commander Zeftai adjusted his position in the metal chair. His clawed hands, once steady enough to guide plasma bolts through the eye of a needle, now trembled slightly as he began his account. The Galactic Council made first contact with humanity in 2387 by their calendar. I remember because I was serving as a tactical advisor during the integration process. The humans seemed unremarkable, physically weak compared to most species, lacking natural armor or weapons, with lifespans that barely registered on our military planning timescales. Zeftai's middle eye closed, a sign of deep memory recall among his people. We assigned them to Sector 7 of our defensive grid, what we considered a quiet posting. The humans established their colony on Kepler Prime, and for 3 years, everything proceeded normally. They built their settlements, established trade routes, and participated in council meetings with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm for peace. The alien veteran's voice took on a bitter edge. The Kree-Thak expansion wars changed everything. When their fleets pushed into Sector 7, we expected the human colony to evacuate like any sensible species would. Instead, they sent a single transmission to the council. We're not going anywhere. Commander Zeftai stood and began pacing, his 4 legs moving in the distinctive rhythm that indicated agitation among his species. I was assigned to oversee their evacuation. My flagship, the Stellar Dominion, arrived at Kepler Prime expecting to find scared civilians ready to flee. What I found instead was a population preparing for war in ways I had never seen before. The recording captured the scratch of his claws against the metal floor as he remembered. The human military commander, a woman named Colonel Sarah Chun, met me at their primary settlement. She was small, even by human standards, but when she looked at me with those strange forward-facing eyes, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 centuries of warfare: uncertainty. "Commander Zeftai," she said, knowing my rank and name without introduction, "we appreciate the Council's concern, but humanity didn't come this far into space just to run at the first sign of trouble." Her words were polite, but there was something underneath them, a steel that I would later come to recognize as uniquely human. Zeftai returned to his seat, his movements more controlled now. I explained the tactical situation. The Kree-Thak forces numbered in the millions, with ships that had conquered dozens of worlds. Their ground forces were legendary for their brutality, and they had never been stopped by a colony defense force. The humans listened politely. Then Colonel Chun asked me a question that should have warned me what was coming. The alien's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Commander," she said, "in all your years of military service, have you ever seen a species fight for something they truly believed in?" I told her that all species fight for survival, for territory, for resources. But she shook her head. "No, sir. I mean really believed in. Believed in so much that losing wasn't just unacceptable. It was impossible. I didn't understand what she meant then. I thought it was human bravado, the kind of false courage that young species often display before they learn the harsh realities of galactic warfare. I agreed to remain in orbit for 72 hours to assist with the evacuation, confident that once the Kree-Thak scouts arrived, the humans would see reason. Zephty's claws clicked against the chair arms as he continued. The first Kree-Thak probe ships arrived 18 hours later. 3 vessels, each the size of a city, equipped with sensor arrays that could map every fortification on the planet's surface. Standard procedure was for them to broadcast surrender terms, then return to the main fleet with intelligence on defensive positions. What happened next redefined my understanding of warfare. The alien veteran paused, his breathing apparatus cycling more rapidly. The humans didn't wait for surrender terms. The moment those ships entered orbit, they launched their response. But it wasn't what any military commander would expect. Instead of targeting the ships with whatever defensive weapons they possessed, they broadcast a message on every frequency those ships could receive. The transmission lasted exactly 60 seconds. It showed scenes from human history. Battles where impossibly outnumbered forces had held their ground, cities that had resisted sieges for years, individuals who had chosen death over surrender. But more than that, it showed humans building, creating, loving, laughing. It showed what they were fighting for. Zephty's voice grew stronger as he remembered. The final image was Colonel Chun herself, standing in front of the colony's central hall. She looked directly into the camera and said, "This is our home now. Come and take it." Then the transmission cut to coordinates, not of defensive positions, but of hospitals, schools, nurseries. The message was clear. We're not just soldiers here. We're families, communities, civilizations. If you want this world, you'll have to go through all of us. The Kree-Thak probe ships returned to their fleet ahead of schedule. I thought this meant the humans had intimidated them, but I was wrong again. The probes had returned to report something the Kree-Thak had never encountered before, a species that treated warfare not as conquest, but as a statement of values. The recording device captured the aliens' deep sigh. The main Kree-Thak fleet arrived 48 hours later. 700 ships carrying 2 million ground troops. Their commander, war leader Thakval, was famous across the galaxy for his tactical brilliance and ruthlessness. He had personally overseen the conquest of 14 different worlds. I requested permission to speak with him directly. The Kree-Thak are honorable opponents, despite their aggression, and Thakval agreed to a communication link. I expected to negotiate some kind of reduced bombardment, perhaps civilian evacuation corridors. Instead, the war leader asked me about the humans. Zephty's 3 eyes focused intently on the recording device. "Are they warriors?" he asked. I told him they were civilians with minimal military training. "Are they numerous?" I explained their total population was barely 2 million across the entire planet. "Do they possess superior weapons?" Their technology was generations behind Kree-Thak standards. Then, Thakval asked the question that haunts me still. "Then, why do my scouts report that they fight as if they have already won?" I had no answer for him then. I would learn the truth soon enough. The alien veteran's voice took on a note of respect tinged with horror. The Kree-Thak ground assault began at dawn on the 4th day. Standard doctrine called for orbital bombardment to soften defensive positions, followed by mass deployment of shock troops to overwhelm remaining resistance. The entire operation was projected to last 6 hours. It lasted 6 months. Zephty stood again, moving to a small window that showed the stars beyond Haven's Rest. The humans had spent those 4 days doing something no species in galactic history had ever done. They had turned their entire civilization into a weapon. Not through technology or numbers, but through will. Every settlement became a fortress. Every civilian became a soldier. Every piece of infrastructure became a trap. But more than that, they had connected everything, not through communication networks or supply lines, but through purpose. Each human knew exactly what they were fighting for, and exactly what losing would mean. The first Kree-Thak drop ships landed in what they thought was an agricultural sector. They expected light resistance from scattered defensive positions. Instead, they found farmers who had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Men and women who knew every inch of their land, every place to hide, every way to strike back. The alien's voice grew quieter, more reverent. I watched from orbit as 1,200 Kree shock troopers, veterans of a dozen campaigns, were held in place for 18 hours by 43 human farmers. These weren't soldiers in any sense we understood. They were people defending their homes with weapons that shouldn't have been effective against Kree armor. But the humans had learned something about warfare that we had forgotten. Technology doesn't win battles. People do. And when those people refuse to lose, the equation changes completely. Zeftai returned to his seat, his movements heavy with memory. I sent down observation teams to understand what was happening. My intelligence officers reported situations that made no tactical sense. A human woman in her 70s had held off an entire Kree squad by turning her greenhouse into a maze of improvised explosives. A group of human children, none older than their species' equivalent of adolescence, had disabled 6 Kree war machines using nothing but knowledge of chemistry they'd learned in school. War leader Thakval requested a meeting after the first week. His forces had secured less than 2% of the planet's surface, and his casualties were mounting beyond anything his strategic models had predicted. When I met him aboard his flagship, this commander who had broken the resistance of worlds was asking me to explain how an agricultural colony was outfighting his elite forces. The recording captured Zeftai's bitter laugh. I told him what I was beginning to understand. We weren't fighting a colony. We were fighting an idea. The humans had taken everything that made them human, their bonds to each other, their love for their homes, their absolute refusal to accept defeat, and they had weaponized it. That's when Thakval made his first mistake. He decided that if civilian resistance was the problem, he would eliminate the civilians. He ordered precision strikes on the human settlements, targeting hospitals, schools, residential areas. He thought that by destroying what the humans were fighting for, he could break their will to resist. Zeftai's 3 eyes closed simultaneously, a gesture of profound sorrow among his people. Instead, he created something the galaxy had never seen before. Human beings with nothing left to lose except their principles. And that, as we learned, was when humans became truly dangerous. The attacks on civilian targets lasted 3 days. When they ended, the human resistance had changed. They were no longer fighting to protect their homes. They were fighting to ensure that no other species would ever have to endure what they had endured. They were fighting for the idea that some things are worth any sacrifice. Colonel Chin's final transmission to the Kree fleet came on the 10th day of the siege. She stood in the ruins of what had been their primary school, surrounded by the bodies of children who had died defending their friends. Her words were simple. You wanted to see what humans do when you threaten what we love. Now you know. What you don't understand yet is what we do to those who hurt what we love. The alien veteran's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The systematic destruction of war leader Thakval's fleet began the next morning. Not through superior firepower or advanced tactics, but through human ingenuity applied with absolute focus. They had turned every piece of debris from their destroyed settlements into weapons. They had converted their industrial facilities into factories that produced devices whose sole purpose was to kill Kree soldiers as efficiently as possible. But more than that, they had achieved something that our military academies teach is impossible. They had created a completely decentralized resistance network where every individual was capable of independent tactical decision-making while maintaining perfect strategic coordination. Each human fought with the knowledge of what every other human was fighting for. Zeftai looked directly at the recording device. By the end of the second week, Thakval was requesting reinforcements. By the end of the third week, he was requesting extraction. By the end of the fourth week, he was dead, killed not in glorious battle, but by a human engineer who had converted the planet's mining equipment into artillery that could strike orbiting ships. The surviving Kree forces surrendered after 6 months, not to superior numbers or better weapons, but to the simple recognition that the humans would never stop fighting. They had created a military philosophy based on a principle that no other species had ever seriously considered, that some things are more important than survival itself. The alien leaned back in his chair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. The Galactic Council classified the engagement as a minor colonial defense action. But those of us who witnessed it understood that we had seen the emergence of a new kind of warfare. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They had proven that the will to fight could overcome any tactical disadvantage. That was my first lesson in human combat power. I thought it was also my last. I was wrong again. The humans had only shown us what they could do when defending something they loved. We had yet to learn what they could do when they decided to take something they wanted. The recording device captured Zeftai's final words as the first part of his testimony concluded. The Kepler Prime engagement taught the galaxy that humans were dangerous when cornered. What came next would teach us that they were far more dangerous when they were free to act on their own terms. Commander Zeftai activated the recording device for the second session, his movements more deliberate now. The weight of memory seemed to have settled deeper into his frame overnight. The Kepler Prime incident should have been an isolated event, a single colony's desperate last stand. Instead, it became the foundation for everything that followed. Within 6 months of the Kree-Thak surrender, every human settlement in Council space had received detailed tactical reports on the defense. Not just the military aspects, but the psychological and social foundations that had made victory possible. The alien veteran's voice carried a note of reluctant admiration. Other species would have celebrated their victory and moved on. The humans studied it, dissected it, and began systematically improving upon it. They approached warfare the same way they approached every other problem, by refusing to accept that current limitations were permanent limitations. Zeftai moved to the window again, gazing out at the neutral space beyond Haven's Rest. I was reassigned after Kepler Prime, promoted actually to serve as a liaison between the Council Military Command and the growing human settlements. The Council wanted someone with direct experience of human tactics to help integrate their forces into our broader defensive strategies. What I discovered was that integration was impossible. Not because humans were unwilling to cooperate, but because they operated from fundamentally different assumptions about what warfare was supposed to accomplish. The alien's claws clicked against the window frame as he remembered. Traditional galactic warfare follows predictable patterns. Territory is claimed through superior force, defended through static positions, and lost when those positions become untenable. Wars end when one side acknowledges that continued resistance will cost more than surrender. Humans rejected every single one of those assumptions. Zeftai returned to his seat, his 3 eyes focusing intently on the recording device. My first assignment was to observe their military training facilities. What I found challenged everything I thought I knew about combat preparation. Human soldiers weren't just learning to fight, they were learning to think. Every other species in the galaxy trains warriors by teaching them to follow orders efficiently. Humans train their soldiers by teaching them to understand why those orders mattered. A human soldier could explain not just what their mission was, but why that mission served their broader strategic goals, how it protected their values, and what they personally were fighting for. The alien veteran's voice grew more intense as he continued. But that was just the beginning. Human military doctrine incorporated something that no other species had ever considered: the assumption that every battle plan would fail. Instead of creating elaborate strategies designed to unfold perfectly, humans created what they called adaptive frameworks, basic principles that could be applied regardless of changing circumstances. Their soldiers weren't trained to execute specific maneuvers. They were trained to improvise solutions to whatever problems they encountered. Zeftai paused, his breathing apparatus cycling rapidly. I witnessed this firsthand during a joint training exercise on Centauri base. The scenario was straightforward. A combined force of humans and Kree-Thak were to assault a fortified position held by Valdaran defenders. Standard Council doctrine called for the Kree-Thak to provide heavy assault capabilities while humans handled support functions. The exercise lasted exactly 47 minutes. The humans ignored the entire battle plan. The alien's 3 eyes closed in sequence as he recalled the details. Instead of supporting the Kree-Thak assault, the human forces split into small teams and began attacking the fortification from directions that weren't even included in our tactical models. They used the Valdaran defensive fire as cover for their own movements, turned our own support weapons against the fortification's blind spots, and somehow convinced a third of the Valdaran defenders to surrender without firing a shot. When I demanded an explanation, Colonel Chun, who had been promoted after Kepler Prime, told me something that revolutionized my understanding of human military thinking. "Commander," she said, "every battle is ultimately fought inside the minds of the people participating in it. We win by changing how our enemies think about the battle itself." Zeftai stood and began pacing again, his movements betraying his continued unease with these memories. The exercise analysis revealed the scope of what the humans had achieved. They had essentially fought 3 different battles simultaneously: the physical engagement against the fortification, a psychological campaign against the Valdaran defenders' morale, and a strategic demonstration to their Kree-Thak allies about the limitations of conventional assault tactics. More disturbing was their post-exercise briefing. While every other species focused on analyzing what had gone wrong with the battle plan, the humans were already designing improvements for tactics that had worked perfectly. They treated success not as an end point, but as a foundation for further advancement. The alien veteran returned to his window, his reflection mixing with the starfield beyond. Within a year, human military advisors were attached to council forces throughout the galaxy. Officially, they were observers learning from more experienced species. In reality, they were gathering intelligence on every military doctrine, every tactical innovation, every strategic philosophy that the galaxy had developed over millennia of warfare. And they were improving on all of it. Zeftai's voice took on a tone of wary respect. Human innovation wasn't limited to tactics or weapons technology. They revolutionized the fundamental concept of what a military could be. Traditional armies are separate from civilian populations, with distinct command structures and specialized roles. Human forces were integrated into their societies so completely that the distinction between soldier and civilian became meaningless. Every human settlement became a military academy where children learned tactical thinking alongside mathematics and literature. Every human engineer was trained in combat applications for their specialty. Every human farmer understood the strategic importance of food security and supply line interdiction. The alien paused at his seat, but didn't sit down. But the most unsettling development was their approach to alliance warfare. Other species form military coalitions based on shared interests or mutual defense needs. Humans formed alliances based on shared values, and they exported their military philosophy along with their tactical support. I observed this during the Rigel system crisis, when Nexari pirates began raiding the trade routes. A coalition of 7 species requested human assistance, expecting them to contribute ships and personnel to conventional patrol operations. Instead, the humans proposed something unprecedented. They would train local forces to eliminate the pirate threat permanently. Zeftai finally sat down, his movements heavy with the weight of revelation. The training program lasted 6 months. When it concluded, the Rigel coalition hadn't just acquired better tactics. They had transformed their entire approach to regional security. Instead of reacting to threats, they had learned to identify and eliminate the conditions that allowed threats to emerge. The pirate raids stopped not because they were suppressed, but because the humans had taught the local forces to make piracy economically and tactically impossible throughout the entire sector. The alien veteran's voice grew quieter, more thoughtful. What troubled me most was the realization that humans weren't just sharing tactics. They were sharing their fundamental approach to problem solving. Species that worked with human military advisors began thinking like humans, approaching conflicts with the same systematic creativity, and refusing to accept limitations as permanent. The galaxy was experiencing the most significant military revolution in recorded history, and most species didn't even realize it was happening. HFY activated a small display screen beside his chair, showing tactical readouts from various engagements. The data tells a story more clearly than words. In the 3 years following Kepler Prime, human-advised forces achieved a 97% success rate in defensive operations and an 83% success rate in offensive campaigns. But, more significantly, conflicts involving human-trained forces ended 60% faster and with 40% fewer casualties on all sides. Humans had discovered something that had eluded galactic military science for millennia. The most effective way to win wars was to make them too expensive for anyone to want to fight. The aliens' claws traced patterns on the display screen as he continued. Their next innovation challenged our understanding of warfare even more fundamentally. Traditional military doctrine assumes that superior numbers or technology will eventually overcome tactical advantages. Humans rejected this assumption and began developing what they called force multiplication systems. Instead of building larger armies, they created methods for making small forces dramatically more effective. A single human squad could coordinate with civilian infrastructure, local environmental conditions, and allied forces to achieve objectives that traditionally required entire battalions. HFY's 3 eyes focused on different aspects of the tactical display. I witnessed this during the Outer Rim rebellions, when separatist forces on 12 different worlds declared independence from the Council. Previous such crises had required years of siege warfare and resulted in massive casualties on both sides. The humans proposed an alternative approach. Instead of military suppression, they offered to mediate negotiations while providing security guarantees to both sides. What they actually did was far more sophisticated. The alien veteran's voice carried a note of amazement even years later. Human negotiation teams worked with separatist leaders to identify their core grievances, then developed practical solutions that addressed those concerns while maintaining Council authority. Simultaneously, human military advisors worked with both Council forces and separatist militias to establish protocols for de-escalating conflicts before they became violent. But the most remarkable aspect was their intelligence operation. Humans had somehow gathered detailed information about the economic, social, and political conditions on all 12 worlds, then used that information to craft specific solutions for each situation. HFY stood again, moving restlessly around the small recording chamber. The Outer Rim crisis ended not with victory or defeat, but with transformation. The separatist worlds remained in the Council, but with new forms of local autonomy that actually strengthened their connections to the broader galactic community. Council military forces gained new allies who were invested in maintaining stability rather than resentful subjects planning the next rebellion. And the humans had accomplished this while revealing almost nothing about their actual capabilities or intentions. The alien's voice grew more serious as he continued. By this point, other species were beginning to ask questions about human military doctrine. The Valdaran Empire requested direct consultation on their border defense strategies. The Nexari Collective wanted human advisors for their deep space exploration fleets. Even the Kree, despite their defeat at Kepler Prime, were seeking human expertise for their own military reforms. Every request was accepted. Every advisory position was filled with competent, helpful humans who shared their knowledge freely and effectively. And every species that worked with human military advisors became more effective, more stable, and more aligned with human strategic interests. HFY returned to the window, his reflection now dominating the view of space beyond. The revelation came during my attendance at the annual Galactic Military Council. Representatives from 47 different species were present, sharing intelligence about threats, coordinating defensive strategies, and planning joint operations. What I realized was that 31 of those species were now using military doctrines that were fundamentally based on human innovations. They still called their forces by traditional names, and maintained their cultural identities, but their actual tactical thinking, strategic planning, and operational philosophies had been transformed by human influence. The humans had achieved something that no species in galactic history had ever accomplished. They had conquered the galaxy's military establishment without fighting a single aggressive war. The alien veteran turned back to the recording device, his 3 eyes reflecting the weight of his realization. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. During a classified briefing on emerging threats, I learned that human military intelligence had detailed assessments of every major species' combat capabilities, political structures, economic vulnerabilities, and social dynamics. They knew exactly how to defeat any potential opponent, not through superior force, but through precise application of pressure at critical points. They had mapped the galaxy's power structure so completely that they could predict the outcome of conflicts before they began. Zeftai's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. When I confronted Colonel Chun about this intelligence capability, her response changed my understanding of human nature forever. "Commander," she said, "we're not planning to conquer anyone. We're planning to make conquest impossible. Every species we've helped develop better military capabilities is now capable of defending themselves against any aggressor, including us. Every alliance we've fostered creates networks of mutual support that make large-scale warfare economically ruinous. Every tactical innovation we've shared makes conflicts shorter, less destructive, and more focused on achieving genuine resolution rather than simple victory." The alien veteran returned to his seat for the final time in this session. She was right, and that was what made it so terrifying. The humans had weaponized cooperation itself. They had created a galactic military structure where their own strategic interests were served by everyone else's success and security. They had made themselves indispensable not through force or coercion, but through genuine helpfulness and effectiveness. Every species that tried to operate independently of human influence found themselves at a severe disadvantage compared to those who embraced human military innovation. Zeftai's claws clicked against the chair arms as he concluded this portion of his testimony. The second phase of human military development taught the galaxy that they were more than just effective defenders. They were strategic thinkers who operated on timescales and with planning capabilities that exceeded anything we had previously encountered. But I was still unprepared for what came next. Everything I had observed about human military power had been demonstrated in defensive operations or advisory roles. I had yet to see what humans could do when they decided that a threat needed to be eliminated entirely. The recording device captured his final words as the second session ended. The galaxy was about to learn that human creativity and systematic thinking could be applied to destruction just as effectively as it had been applied to defense and cooperation. And once that lesson began, there would be no going back. Commander Zeftai's hands shook as he activated the recording device for the third session. The neutral lighting of Haven's Rest seemed dimmer now, as if the weight of his memories was affecting even the station's atmosphere systems. The Vorthack incursion began like any other border dispute. A previously unknown species emerged from the galactic rim, claiming territory and demanding tribute from established colonies. What made them different was their complete disregard for council authority and their systematic extermination of civilian populations on worlds that resisted their demands. The alien veteran's voice carried a hollowness that hadn't been present in previous sessions. The first 3 worlds that fell to Vorthack forces were stripped of all life within 48 hours of conquest. Not enslaved, not relocated, completely eliminated. Men, women, children, even the planetary ecosystems were reduced to sterile wasteland. Zeftai stood and moved to the center of the room, his 4 legs carrying him in tight circles as he spoke. The council response was immediate but conventional. We assembled a coalition fleet, established defensive perimeters around threatened worlds, and began negotiations through standard diplomatic channels. The Vorthack response was to accelerate their timeline and target civilian populations specifically. When the 4th world fell, we realized we were dealing with a form of warfare that had no precedent in galactic history. The Vorthack weren't seeking conquest or resources. They were conducting systematic genocide as a tool of territorial expansion. The aliens' three eyes closed in sequence, a gesture of profound sorrow. The Council Military Command requested human assistance after the Fifth World was sterilized. We expected them to provide their usual advisory support and defensive innovations. Instead, Colonel Chun, now promoted to general, requested a private meeting with the entire Council leadership. What she told us in that meeting changed the nature of warfare forever. Zeftai returned his chair, but, perched on its edge, his posture tense with memory. General Chun presented intelligence reports that demonstrated something horrifying. The Vorthack weren't simply aggressive expansionists. They were conducting a methodical campaign to test galactic response capabilities. Each attack was designed to gather information about Council military doctrine, response times, and strategic limitations. They're not trying to conquer territory, she explained. They're mapping our weaknesses. Every conventional response we provide gives them data for planning a larger assault that will overwhelm our defensive capabilities entirely. The alien veteran's voice grew quiet, deadly serious. Then, she said something that made every member of the Council realize that our understanding of human military capability had been fundamentally incomplete. Members of the Council, she said, humanity has spent the past 4 years learning how to help civilizations defend themselves. We have also spent that time learning how to destroy civilizations that threaten the principles we defend. The Vorthack have made genocide their primary military tool. This means they have chosen to abandon the fundamental premise that underlies all civilized warfare, the assumption that defeated enemies deserve to continue existing. Zeftai's claws clicked against his chair as he continued. What happened next challenged everything I thought I knew about human nature. General Chun requested Council authorization for what she termed unrestricted warfare against the Vorthack. Not just permission to engage their military forces, but authorization to eliminate their capacity to threaten civilian populations ever again. The Council debates lasted 18 hours. Some species argued that such authorization would violate the fundamental principles of civilized conflict. Others pointed out that the Vorthack had already abandoned those principles by targeting civilian populations for extermination. The alien veteran's voice grew distant as he remembered. The final vote was unanimous. Every species that had witnessed the sterilized worlds concluded that some threats were too dangerous to contain. They had to be eliminated entirely. That was the moment we learned what humans could do when they decided that mercy was more dangerous than ruthlessness. Zeftai stood again, moving to the window where space stretched endlessly beyond Haven's Rest. The human response began immediately, but not in any way the Council had expected. Instead of massive fleet deployments or escalated military production, the humans requested detailed intelligence on Vorthack society, technology, biology, and strategic objectives. Within 72 hours, human intelligence had assembled a complete profile of Vorthack civilization. Not just their military capabilities, but their social structures, economic systems, psychological motivations, and technological dependencies. The alien's reflection in the window seemed to waver as he spoke. What they discovered was that the Vorthack were not inherently evil or uniquely aggressive. They were a species that had developed in an environment where resource scarcity made competitive elimination of other life forms necessary for survival. Their genocide tactics were actually sophisticated ecological management. They were preparing planets for long-term habitation by removing all competing life forms. This understanding changed everything. Zeftai turned back to the recording device, his three eyes focusing intently. Human military doctrine had always been based on understanding why enemies fought, not just how they fought. Against the Vorthack, this principle led to a strategic approach that no other species would have considered. Instead of defeating them militarily, the humans decided to make their survival strategy obsolete. The first phase was pure intelligence warfare. Human agents infiltrated Vorthack territory not to gather military intelligence, but to understand their resource distribution networks. Within weeks, they had identified the precise ecological and economic factors that drove Vorthack expansion. The alien veteran's voice took on a tone of reluctant admiration. Simultaneously, human scientists began developing what they called environmental modification technology, methods for transforming planetary ecosystems to make them suitable for multiple species simultaneously. If they could eliminate the resource scarcity that drove Vorthack aggression, they could potentially end the threat without destroying the Vorthack themselves. But they also prepared for the possibility that diplomacy would fail. Zeftai's movements around the room became more agitated as he continued. The backup plan revealed the true scope of human military thinking. They had developed what they termed civilization-level countermeasures, strategies for dismantling the technological, economic, and social foundations that allowed the Vorthack to conduct their genocidal campaigns. Not just destroying their military forces, but eliminating their capacity to rebuild those forces. Not just defending against their attacks, but making it impossible for them to conceive of attacks as viable strategies. The alien sat down heavily, his frame sagging with the weight of memory. The human diplomatic overture to the Vorthack came after 6 weeks of preparation. General Chun personally led a small fleet to the edge of Vorthack territory and requested direct communication with their leadership council. The meeting lasted 4 hours. What was discussed has never been fully disclosed, but I was present for General Chin's briefing to the council afterward. Zeftai's voice grew very quiet. She explained that the Vorthack leadership had been presented with 2 options. The first was a comprehensive technology transfer that would allow them to modify planetary environments to support both Vorthack and existing populations, eliminating their need for genocidal expansion. The second option was the systematic destruction of their civilization's capacity for interstellar warfare. The humans had made the choice very simple: evolution or extinction. The alien veteran's claws traced patterns on his chair arms as he remembered. The Vorthack leadership requested 72 hours to consider the proposal. During those 3 days, human forces demonstrated exactly what the second option would entail. They didn't attack Vorthack military positions or infrastructure. Instead, they began systematically disabling every single Vorthack vessel, communications relay, and manufacturing facility throughout their territory. Zeftai's 3 eyes widened as he recalled the scope of the operation. 47 worlds, hundreds of space stations, thousands of ships, all simultaneously rendered inoperable by human forces that seemed to appear and disappear without engaging in actual combat. No Vorthack personnel were killed, but their entire technological civilization was paralyzed within 60 hours. The message was unmistakable. Human military capability extended far beyond what they had ever demonstrated in defensive operations. When they chose to act aggressively, they could dismantle entire civilizations with surgical precision. The alien veteran stood and began pacing again. But the most terrifying aspect was the coordination required. The operation involved human forces scattered across thousands of light years, all acting in perfect synchronization without any detectable communication between units. They had achieved a level of tactical integration that defied our understanding of military logistics. When I questioned General Chan about how such coordination was possible, her response revealed something fundamental about human military evolution. "Commander," she said, "every human in our armed forces shares the same basic understanding of our strategic objectives and tactical principles. When the situation requires action, they don't need orders. They need opportunity." Zeftai paused at the window again, his reflection overlaying the starfield beyond. The Vorthack leadership accepted the technology transfer proposal after witnessing the demonstration. But the agreement included provisions that fundamentally altered their society. Human technical advisors would assist with environmental modification projects. Human cultural liaisons would help develop new social structures based on cooperation rather than competition. Human military observers would monitor compliance with the agreement. The Vorthak had been transformed from a genocidal threat into a species under human guidance and supervision. The alien veteran's voice grew more intense as he continued. But the real revelation came during the post-operation analysis. Council intelligence discovered that the Vorthak had never been the primary objective of the human response. They were a test case. The same systematic intelligence, gathering, strategic planning, and operational capability that the humans had demonstrated against the Vorthak was being applied to every potential threat throughout the galaxy. Zeftai returned to his seat, his movements betraying his growing unease. Human intelligence services had compiled detailed profiles on every species' military capabilities, social vulnerabilities, and potential for aggression. They had developed specific countermeasures for every conceivable threat scenario, and they had positioned assets throughout the galaxy to implement those countermeasures if necessary. The humans had created the capacity to prevent or eliminate any threat to galactic stability before it could fully emerge. The alien's claws clicked rapidly against his chair as he spoke. More disturbing was the realization that this capability had been developed in parallel with their advisory and assistance programs. Every species that had benefited from human military cooperation had also been assessed as a potential threat, and contingency plans had been developed accordingly. The humans had simultaneously strengthened the galaxy's defensive capabilities while ensuring that they maintained absolute strategic superiority over any combination of forces that might oppose them. Zeftai's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. During a classified briefing 3 months after the Vorthak resolution, I learned the full scope of human strategic planning. They had modeled every possible configuration of galactic political and military power, identified the conditions that could lead to large-scale warfare, and developed interventions designed to prevent those conditions from arising. But they had also prepared for the possibility that prevention might fail. The alien veteran looked directly at the recording device, his 3 eyes reflecting a deep, abiding fear. The human military had developed what they called galactic stability protocols, predetermined responses to specific threat scenarios that could be implemented without further authorization or delay. If certain conditions were detected, human forces would automatically take action to neutralize threats to civilian populations. These protocols covered everything from preventing aggressive expansion campaigns to stopping genocidal regimes to eliminating technological developments that could destabilize interstellar peace. Zeftai stood for the final time in this session, moving to stand directly in front of the recording device. The humans had created a system where they functioned as the galaxy's immune system, automatically identifying and eliminating threats to the civilizations they had committed to protecting. And there was no mechanism for overriding or controlling this system except through human command authority. The alien's voice carried a note of resigned acceptance. When I confronted General Chan about the implications of galactic stability protocols, she provided an explanation that summarized everything I had learned about human warfare. Commander, we learned from Kepler Prime that some things are worth any sacrifice to protect. We learned from our advisory work that cooperation and mutual support make everyone stronger. And we learned from the Vorthak that some threats cannot be negotiated with or contained. They must be eliminated entirely. Our protocols ensure that the galaxy remains a place where civilization can flourish and grow. The cost of maintaining that security is eternal vigilance and the willingness to act when diplomacy and deterrence prove insufficient. Zeftai's claws traced one final pattern against the recording device as he concluded this session. The third phase of my education in human combat power taught me that they had evolved beyond traditional concepts of military force. They had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a species capable of imposing peace through the credible threat of absolute victory. But even this understanding would prove incomplete. The humans had shown me their defensive capabilities, their strategic thinking, and their capacity for precision elimination of threats. I had yet to witness what they could accomplish when their fundamental principles were directly challenged. The recording device captured his final words. The galaxy was about to discover that everything we had seen of human warfare had been them exercising restraint. The true extent of their capabilities would only be revealed when restraint became impossible.